President Trump, who should be the honest broker, seems to be purely on the side of evil and on the side of Putin. Now, maybe he has some brilliant plan. He tells us how brilliant he is. And this week we might see it when he stitches up Putin. But at the moment, he is only stitching up Zelensky and the Ukrainian people who have fought so valiantly against the Russians after their illegal invasion on the 24th of February 2022.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. We have another big week of diplomatic tension between the US, between the UK, the EU, between Russia, Ukraine. There is so much happening this week. So today we've spoken to former British Colonel Hamish to Bretton-Gordon about kind of what would he do if he was still working in the army? How would he help Ukrainian troops if British troops were sent to Ukraine, boots on the ground, as Sir Keir Starmer had said that he is willing to do? We've also spoken to him about Senator Mark Kelly's comments. He recently visited Ukraine and he spoke to troops about what it felt like to have aid and intelligence taken away from the US, and how that's affected their ability to kind of fight this war. But Hamish tells us that, look, Russian troops are not all they're cracked up to be. They're not very experienced. They're not experts in tanks, in drones. So we speak to him about all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on Times Radio's YouTube. Former British Colonel Hamish to Bretton-Gordon, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, Hamish, to kickstart, Donald Trump, while responding to a warning by the Polish president about how Ukraine will go without this US aid, he said, well, it may not survive anyway. What did you make of such a brutal comment from the US president?
Well, I think it's pretty harsh, and we've come to expect in the last sort of week or two some pretty extraordinary statements coming out of the White House from Trump and from his deputy Vance. It's very clear that Trump is, trying to direct a peace deal or a ceasefire that very much suits him. However, some of the decisions that he's been making recently, that we will cover no doubt, appear to favour Putin rather than Zelensky. And I think everybody is hoping that Trump will be the honest broker in this ceasefire and peace deal. And you can see by the reactions from the Poles and other European countries that this has really irritated a lot of us in Europe, that by trying to force a peace deal, Trump seems to focus on what Putin wants rather than what Zelensky and what Europe wants. So to suggest that Ukraine could fail with or without US support, I think naive is not the wrong word, because I don't think anybody would put that particular label onto Trump being naive. But I think the way that European countries led by Britain and France and others are stepping up to the plate, that actually, and also we know the state of the Russian army is in a desperate position at the moment, which is why it's so frustrating that Putin has switched off the intelligence and other things. That actually at the moment, my personal view is that Europe without the US can certainly help Ukraine struggle on, and the fact that Trump thinks that Ukraine might fail anyway, I think is holds no substance at all, and just really again destabilizes the ceasefire process.
Hamish, Ukraine are reportedly trying to propose a sea and air ceasefire when Zelensky meets in Saudi Arabia today and when negotiations with the US continue this week. But Trump says that he wants the killing to stop, right? He says he wants peace. There's too many people dying. He throws around various numbers, whether they're accurate or not. But if he wants peace to happen, if he wants killing to stop, why wouldn't he ask Putin to at least pause bombing if they have such a great relationship until a deal is struck? Ukraine is still being attacked on the daily. For instance, on Sunday alone, Russian forces retook 3 settlements in Kursk.
Well, it is extraordinary. As you say, Trump wants the killing to stop, but actually what he has done in the last week by stopping US military aid and switching off US intelligence assets has actually increased the killing, because it's blinded Ukraine to a lot of the attacks that have been happening. First of all, the attacks in the Kursk region, where Russia has made considerable gains, and also the attacks by drones and missiles on civilian targets. And as you've articulated, a lot of Ukraine civilians have been killed over the last few days and the last week. And a lot of that is attributed to the fact that American surveillance and tracking assets are no longer available to Ukraine at the moment. So actually what Trump is saying and the effect of the actions he's making is making it more likely that the killing will increase and continue. And absolutely, he is only directing his decisions at Kyiv and Zelensky and the Ukrainians at the moment to make their fighting much more difficult, whereas actually the people who are creating the casualties in the main are the Russians, and he seems to have, left them completely unfettered, which is, it's very difficult to understand. And if one put Putin into Trump's position at the moment, you cannot think that he would do anything differently.
I want to get into a few comments from Senator Mark Kelly Hamish. He just visited Ukraine, where he spoke to numerous Ukrainians living in Ukraine, along with troops and pilots. He tweeted that Donald Trump is trying to weaken Ukraine's hand and we are owed an explanation. If Putin gains ground, he won't agree to a ceasefire and he will eventually threaten a NATO ally. And this puts American troops and the American people at risk. So basically, withdrawing all that aid, withdrawing that intelligence has given him basically the momentum to keep fighting. Is that your interpretation?
I'm afraid it is. If we unpick these various decisions, by withholding American military support, although in the very short term, it's not going to have a direct impact on the ground, but Ukraine military have to look at what weaponry they've got available and have to use it. They're not going to fire everything they've got at the moment if they know they're not going to get anything tomorrow. So that has an impact on their offensive nature. It also has an impact on their air defense assets, as we've already seen. Some figures are putting it that Russia has been 50% more successful since the stopping of US military aid, and also by the stopping of US intelligence assets. So that is having a significant effect. Also, it's very clear that with this blackout, because not only can Ukraine not see Russian attacks, it also cannot see the Russian forces. And it was using the US intelligence assets for a lot of its targeting processes to be able to hit Russian forces as they mass to attack into Ukraine. Now it can't do that now. So really, Putin is getting a double whammy here. His much beleaguered military has got a chance to test and adjust and sort itself out, whereas Putin can still attack into Ukraine unfettered. So I absolutely agree with the US Senator. This is having a really detrimental effect. And the people I speak to in Ukraine as well say the same story. It's having a huge psychological impact. And in warfare, psychology is 10 to 1 the physical. So it is really giving all the trump cards to Putin here. And when, we don't want to dwell on conspiracy theories and all the rest of it, with social media alive with various dits and talks and information about how Trump has been closely involved with Putin, for the last 15 years or so. I think hitherto one just dismissed it as being complete conspiracy theories, but there is a body of evidence developing, and the decisions that Trump is making leads you to believe that there might be something in it. And I think Trump really, in the next week or so, particularly what's happening in Riyadh at the moment, has to demonstrate to the world that he is a fair and honest broker here and wants a decent peace rather than a peace that suits Putin, who is the aggressor, who invaded Ukraine. And by changing the sort of world order, as it were, quite apart from Trump saying that President Zelensky was possibly initiating a global war, with what Trump is doing at the moment, the chance for war in Europe, and we can see by the reactions in the capitals of Europe, is far more likely than it has been probably in the last 10 to 20 years.
Furthermore, on that kind of note of Senator Mark Kelly, Hamish, he said that he also met with some Ukrainian pilots who are trained in Arizona. Now, you and I have spoken at length about air defense and how important it is, especially for Ukraine as they continue to kind of push troops out. And he wrote on X, when Trump cut off these pilots from US intelligence, that they need to plan their missions. He blinded them to the threat and put them and their aircraft at risk. But worse than that, it helps the Russians advance further into Ukrainian territory and murder more Ukrainians. President Trump says the Russians are hitting them hard in a tone that implies approval. It is sickening to see that from an American president. Hitting them hard means more dead Ukrainian kids. So it was an interesting response from Senator Mark Kelly there on the ground in Ukraine, speaking to these pilots who have been deeply affected by especially cutting off this US intelligence, Hamish.
Well, I think the Senator Kelly is right here. It's all very well having F-16 and Mirage fighter jets, but they are completely behest to the intelligence that they get, so that they can track targets, shoot down Russian drones and missiles that have been fired at them, and also attack Russian forces that are attacking into Ukraine. But without that intelligence that pretty much has been provided by the Americans hitherto, they're absolutely blinded and being put at risk. And that is why I think those of us who have been following this war so closely are so exasperated that at a time when Ukraine should be getting a just peace, ceasefire and a just peace, the person who thinks and claims and probably is the most powerful person in the world, President Trump, who should be the honest broker, seems to be purely on the side of evil and on the side of Putin. Now, maybe he has some brilliant plan. He tells us how brilliant he is. And this week we might see it when he stitches up Putin. But at the moment, he is only stitching up Zelensky and the Ukrainian people who have fought so valiantly against the Russians after their illegal invasion on the 24th of February, 2022.
Hamish, we know that you're a retired British colonel, but say you're still in the midst, you're still leading a team and you've been sent to Ukraine to help troops. We know that Sir Keir Starmer did say that he was willing to send UK troops. So say you're one of them, you're leading your team, you don't have the intelligence from the US, you don't have aid from the US. How are you kind of directing the soldiers right now if you were there?
Well, I think there are a couple of things here, Maddie. First of all, I would be absolutely the first to volunteer. I'm still a reservist, and if British troops go into Ukraine with my particular area of expertise, I would be absolutely, on my front foot to go and help. But, having said what we've said about US intelligence, then life becomes incredibly difficult. But I think British and NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine is something we must consider. And the key thing about European NATO countries, we've all trained together. We have capabilities. And perhaps what is lacking with the Ukrainians is the ability to train in what we call combined arms warfare with tanks and fighter jets and drones and artillery. Now, NATO has done that and probably has a couple of armored divisions, 20, 30,000 people ready to do it. So I think they'd make an impact. The other element to this is how do we replicate or replace US intelligence assets? Well, one of the things that Britain is particularly good at is intelligence gathering. And we are part of the Five Eyes community, which is the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And Britain is a very significant partner to that. Although we don't have the same capabilities as the US, ourselves and the French and some of the other European NATO countries do have the ability to generate a significant amount of intelligence that would be used in a scenario where there are NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. So it's not ideal, but actually having an ambivalent President Trump rather than one who is helping Putin would be far better, I think. And if the Europeans and Britain has to get on and help with boots on the ground, then I am sure we are up to that fight. And as I said earlier on, I think the Russian army is struggling. It's untrained, has an awful lot of conscripts who really don't know what they're up to. Although Russia is still making tanks and aircrafts as quickly as it can, it's the people who operate them who are absolutely key. You know, a pilot with a few days' knowledge is barely going to be able to fly a plane. I've just been at the Tank Museum today, looking at tank warfare through the ages and in Ukraine. And one of the key things that we learned in the Second World War is that, you know, barely trained tank crews are virtually useless. And that is pretty much what the Russians have now. So, yeah, of course, having America on our side, having Trump on our side would be a huge benefit. But having him against us is a huge detriment. And hopefully, if he doesn't want to help the West out, if he stays out of this fight, concentrates on his own issues in America, and leaves Europe up to a fair fight with Putin. Because I think the final bit of this, Maddie, is nobody's looked at this in any detail, thinks that Putin is stopping at Ukraine. And that is the assumption we must work on. And if it means putting British and NATO European boots on the ground, we must do it and fight the best we can. If we haven't got the Americans' help, the last thing we need is them helping the other side.
Absolutely, Hamish. And I think going forward, especially in these interviews that I've been doing most days, I think it is important to every day acknowledge to the viewer that there is still bombing going on, there is still air attacks going on, there is still drone attacks going on, because they're not the headlines that grab attention anymore. It is the diplomatic relations currently. It's the fighting between Trump and Zelensky and Putin and whoever may be. It's the relations going on in Saudi. So it is important to acknowledge that this fighting is very much still going on, and Russia is going against them. But a lot of people, including yourself, a lot of reporters have told me on the ground that Ukrainian troops are incredibly brave and they're very, very motivated. But Hamish, just finally to wrap up that kind of question that we spoke about before, say UK and EU troops don't get sent boots on the ground to Ukraine. Can Ukrainian troops still use European and UK intelligence to replace that US intelligence that they are missing?
Well, I don't know the exact details of what's been arranged between, you know, the UK and Kyiv, but I think by the fact of all the support we've been given hitherto, I'm sure that Ukraine would have access to UK and European NATO countries' intelligence. It's absolutely in our best interest. So I am sure that would still happen, even if we don't put boots on the ground, and even if the fighting continues. I think the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has made it absolutely clear that we're full scale behind the Ukrainian people for as long as it takes. And we know that if Ukraine falls to Russia, then other European countries are next. And we just have to see what is happening. In, Poland is looking to mobilize 500,000 men into its army. We know that Finland and Sweden have massive armies and are investing them. Even the Germans now are looking to find 200 billion euros to bolster their defense. So at last, even if we might berate Trump for his apparent support of Putin, at least he has galvanized European countries to take real responsibility for their own defense. So, we in Europe will have to do what we have to do, and Ukraine will have to do with what it's got. If that's without the Americans, then we've got a plan for that. But I think if we allow Ukraine to fall, if we capitulate, then this is going to go on for a very, very long time. Putin is an autocratic tyrant, much the same as Adolf Hitler back in the 30s and 40s, and Europe has got to face up to it. Ideally, we get a ceasefire as soon as possible that's acceptable to the Ukrainians. But if we don't, and if Trump and his group continue to be ambivalent at best, but pro-Putin at worst, then we're going to have to do this ourselves.
And that is, I don't want to say silver lining, but it is the kind of push that Europe needed, this kind of not being able to rely on Donald Trump and his administration. It has prompted Europe to step up, to say that they're going to invest more money in defence, to kind of stick together. We've seen an incredible alliance between the UK and France particularly, so that has kind of been a saving grace. But in terms of how we can help more, Hamish, a final question for you. The former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, he tweeted yesterday that he, along with a lot of experts, this is something that Bill Browder and I speak about most weeks, is that they believe that the EU should be confiscating this $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets to accelerate fixing the destruction in Ukraine, to build military strength, to alleviate this pressure on allies and donors, and prove basically that the principle is clear. This is what Rishi Sunak said. He said, the principle is clear. If you destroy another nation, you pay for the damage. How important do you think it is for the EU right now to do this, to confiscate this $300 billion and to give it to Ukraine, whether that means buying weapons from the US or whether it means letting Ukraine fight this war on its own terms?
Well, I absolutely agree with the previous Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that if we have frozen billions of dollars of Russian money, then absolutely it should go to supporting Ukraine, be it missiles or in the rebuilding. And as Russia is the aggressor, it should be held to account. And Europe needs to come together to do that. I mean, it does seem rather bizarre that Trump if Trump thinks he can make a few $1 billion out of rebuilding Ukraine, then that seems to motivate him more than actually preventing the killing and the death currently happening. But I think we must use every means that we can to enable Ukraine to prevail and to punish Putin and his gangsters in the Kremlin for this activity. This is a dreadful thing that the Russians have done over the last 3 years. But let's not forget, they've been fighting a sort of proxy sabotage war with the West really for the last 20 years. And, I'm talking to you from Salisbury, where, of course, the Russian Secret Service tried to kill the British double agent Sergei Skripal. So, I think we've got to do all we can to get a just settlement for Ukraine and make sure that Russia is seen to pay for it. Otherwise, it just enables the next tyrant who wants to invade another sovereign country.
Absolutely. Hamish to Bretton-Gordon, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you for having me.